Well, hello and welcome to the Overflow August 2020 edition, week two. Okay, sorry, I don't know. I'm just in a silly mood, but thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We're so glad to have you. And we hope that today is a blessing in your life and your spiritual life and journey. And I would like to introduce our people that we have here today. I'm Pastor Ryan Clement. And who are you guys?
I'm Erin.
I am Pastor Ryan Bogert, aka New Ryan.
New Ryan. And I'm old Ryan now.
Yeah,
Do you still get that title now that you've been here a year, Bogert?
yeah, because I'm still the newest Ryan until there's another Ryan.
Okay.
One day
Until the
you'll
next
old Ryan.
So that can be maintained for a long time.
But anyways, here at Overflow, our goal is to process the sermon from the night before and to not only recap it, but talk about how to engage with it practically in our daily lives. So we're going to talk all about that kind of stuff. And if you are streaming with us live, we'd love for you to just say hi or ask us any questions or make any comments in the chat box. And we'd be happy to answer or talk about and discuss. And before we jump into our questions for today, Erin is going to give us a quick review of her sermon.
Yeah, so last night we were in Exodus 32 and we were talking about the Israelites in the wilderness and how the wilderness for them was kind of this season of in between almost, or like a season of kind of wandering and waiting on God to fulfill his promises. And we talked about how when they were in that season, they had just seen this amazing power of God, and yet while they were waiting for Moses, he was up on Mount Sinai meeting with God. And when they were waiting, they made an idol out of a calf, and we talked out of gold. And we talked about how sometimes in our lives, wilderness seasons can reveal the things that we put before God and the things that we idolize, and how God is good all the time, even in the wilderness season.
All the time.
I think that's about it. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I feel like that was such a powerful moment too when you were saying like, God in your best season and your best day is the same as God in your worst season or your worst day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a good reminder. That was cool.
Yeah, what's true in the wilderness is true in the promised land.
There we go. That's what it was.
Well, no, but it was exactly what you said too, but they went together. Yeah.
Yeah, yours just sounded better. Was exactly what Erin said anyway. So
Yeah. Well, when I heard it, I wrote it down. It's good.
Thanks.
no, it's good job.
Thank you.
Cool. So for today, first question up is how do you relate to the idea of the wilderness season, and how does God use wilderness seasons in our lives? I will go first. I love the idea of the wilderness season just because I think it's so relatable. And I think becoming a new Christian when I was 18, I kind of had this mindset a little bit, not perfectly, but that things would kind of be good now, that I was on the right track. I found God and I'm pursuing faith. I'm living rightly. So much of my life, it had been kind of ingrained in me. Like if you do the right thing, like you'll be blessed for it, things will work out. And it's just interesting because the wilderness season is it's almost like the opposite of that. It's like God will allow you to go through difficult things because he is more interested in refining you and your holiness and being made perfect than he is in blessing you with the easiest life possible. And so there's a passage of scripture that says God disciplines those whom he loves. And discipline does not feel loving. When I discipline my 5-year-old or either of my 2-year-olds, they're not like, thanks, Dad. You're just so loving. Like, I just am so grateful that you're calling me out, that you're concerned for my well-being. Like, that's not how we respond to discipline. Yet God disciplines those whom he loves, and discipline is often difficult to go through, but it's needed in the refining process. And so when we see the Israelites wandering for 40 years, or we see Jesus in the desert for 40 days after he's baptized, these are difficult seasons that I wouldn't sign up for. I wouldn't sign up for difficulty, yet so much is established in these times that is needed for the promised land, right? So much of the preparation work, Jesus gets baptized, he goes in the desert and is tempted and weak and starving for 40 days. And it's in that weakest state that he's tested and tempted and tried, and he's strengthened for the years of ministry ahead. And so I think the wilderness seasons are essential and they're important. Early on in my faith, I did not like them, and I would respond with, God, where are you? Like, what's going on? But in the maturity of my faith in life, I've seen wilderness seasons much more of a blessing. And in a weird way, I sort of look forward to them because I know God is often most at work in my own life when I'm going through the most difficult times. So I'm a huge fan of what God does in the wilderness season. I wouldn't say it's an enjoyable process. I wouldn't say it's easy. I wouldn't say it feels good. But in hindsight, it's needed and it's worth it. And it's an expression of God's love. What God was doing in the wilderness to weed out idolatry and bad habits that the Israelites had developed was really ultimately not just for God's glory, but for the people's own good and what was best for them and what they needed. And so I think we just see a lot of love and intention when we are in different wilderness seasons. So, yeah, what about you guys? Any thoughts on the wilderness season?
Yeah, I love that you brought up the parallel between the story we covered yesterday and Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days. In the summer, since we're doing everything outside, we've been trying to keep everything really short or shorter. So the sermons are generally 20 to 25 minutes instead of like 35. But originally, when I was praying and preparing over this, I had both of those stories in my mind. And there's so many parallels between the two. And Jesus in those wilderness in the 40 days is tempted with idols. And then, he always responds by quoting scripture. And the last, oh, I wish I had it with me. But anyway, I really love the idea that like Christ knows what it feels like when we're in the wilderness because he experienced it too, and what it feels like to be tempted by idols. Of course, Christ didn't sin, he didn't give in. But yeah, I really love how those two stories parallel each other so much and both have so much to teach us about idolatry in the wilderness.
Yeah, and for me, um, I have too many stories to really get into them in a deep way. But throughout multiple wilderness seasons of my life, whether like after like, for example, after a breakup or going through a rough time emotionally and things like that, I've really seen God use those things for good. And often I learned my biggest lessons in those seasons. There were a couple like two different wilderness seasons where I sought out counseling. That was like in college when it was free, which is a good time to seek out counseling when you don't have to pay for it. And that was a season of great growth for me where I really processed through a lot of like my childhood issues and family dynamics that affected my behavior and caused me to have certain issues. And I processed through them and, through my relationships with my family and grew a lot in those times. And I think like those are the seasons where I've grown more than any other seasons in a lot of ways, and where I learned new things about myself and new things about God in those seasons. So I really think God uses those wilderness seasons in powerful ways if we listen and if we follow him in those times. And it's easy, like Aaron, you brought up in your sermon, like one way to think about what are my idols is what do I turn to in times of struggle. Um, so it's important that we turn to God and follow the right path in those wilderness seasons in order to see how God works through them and to learn whatever God is trying to have us learn, and remembering that God is always the same and is the same God in the wilderness that he is in the promised land, and all those great metaphors. Anyways, our truths. So yeah, I mean, I feel like wilderness seasons are so often the catalyst and key to growth and learning new things about yourself and about God if you're listening and if you're using them right. Because if I think, it's often easy in a wilderness season to turn away from God or to run away from God, and a lot of people do that. So you need to be careful and try to focus on staying centered in who God is, despite emotional struggle or despite what you're going through. But it can be so powerful, and God can use them in amazing ways.
Yeah, I love that you talked about turning to things in times of struggle. And Aaron, you talked about yesterday how the Israelites, they get out of Egypt and they're on their way to the promised land, but they're in this wilderness and they start running out of food and water and supplies, and they start freaking out. And Moses, their leader, is nowhere to be found. He's up meeting with God, and they start getting concerned, stressed out, and they turn to what's familiar for them. They turn to worship the golden calf and other things from their Egyptian heritage. And it's just interesting how when we go through times of struggle, how our idols are just elevated to the surface very quickly. And almost like as the tide kind of goes out and kind of reveals a lot of the stuff that's happened. Maybe I'm thinking about being at the beach and there's shells and there's rocks and all this stuff is underwater and you don't see it, but as the tide goes out, you can see so much more of kind of what was beneath the surface and just how those things are elevated. I think even in COVID, and I think with all that's been going on the last few months, there's definitely been a lot of things in my life that have definitely surfaced that have always been there, but I have turned to more recently, more often, and that need to be reordered. As you talked about, sin is disordered love, and idolatry is kind of the same principle. And so for me, and this is something that like Enneagram would say a lot about my type, which is a 7, but for me, my idols tend to function in the sphere of satisfaction and feeling satisfied and feeling like the things that I feel like I need in a moment to be okay get met. And whether that's food or that's accomplishment or that's attention or that's some sort of adrenaline or action, it's just like whatever I need in this moment to feel okay, I just need to go do. And making choices for me more about my long-term health and obedience to the Lord rather than just what I feel like I need in this moment is probably one of the biggest idols that categories of idols, I should say, that I'm always kind of circling back to. What about for you guys as we kind of talk about idols? What idols have you noticed in your life? Have you seen coming to the surface or that you've dealt with over the years, and how have you dealt with them?
So for me, my biggest struggle with idols throughout my entire life, even before I became a Christian, because I mean, you can have idols before you become a Christian, it's just, anyways, but is relationships. And by relationships, I mainly mean romantic relationships. I've had 2 exes who I dated for a while, multi-year relationships before I got with my wife, Sarah. But so in high school, before I became a Christian, I dated this girl, and like she was she was everything to me. She was basically functionally, she was my God that I worshiped because she was everything to me. And I put all my time and emotion and energy and effort into that relationship, and she's all I really cared about. And when she broke up with me, and about a day later, I became a Christian. And that's a big part of my testimony and how God used that. And I recognize how unhealthy that relationship was and how unhealthy I was in that relationship. But it was still a struggle even in my next relationship, because I wouldn't say that she was my everything, but she definitely competed with God for my heart and my affections and my attention. And how I've seen that continue to manifest itself, even like with Sarah, as we were dating, is my idol went from the relationship itself to marriage, because I felt like, oh man, like and as someone, I've talked before, I struggle with chronic depression. And as someone who struggles with depression, my like light and hope for the future, I always try to like find something to like help motivate me. And like for like years, when I felt like I knew Sarah was the one, it was like, when we get married, we're going to be together all the time. Life's going to be so much better. We're going to be, we're living together. All of my problems with my roommates and, living in this crappy apartment with 4 other guys, all those problems are going to go away. And like, when I get married, everything's going to be right. Everything's going to be better, and I'm going to be happy. And guess what? Marriage doesn't solve all your problems. And I knew that. intellectually, I know like people have told me that, but it just felt like that was my light at the end of the tunnel. So emotionally for me, that was like my idol. And I was putting my hope into marriage before I got married. Like this is going to be when everything changes and it solves my problem and be so much happier and so much more fulfilled, da 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 da, and then I got married and I'm very happy with my wife Sarah, but doesn't solve all your problems and doesn't make me not a person who struggles with depression, doesn't make all my issues go away. And I really realized like I didn't realize how much that was an idol for me until after marriage, where it's like, man, like I put all my hope into that. Now I'm married, and a few months later, I'm still having issues in my life that I'm struggling with. And and my hope is diminished. But wait, I should have been putting my hope in God the whole time. And that was a big idol for me in a season of my life. And I think for me, that's just the biggest way I've struggled with idols personally. And because it's really easy to put your hope and excitement and your effort and your passion into one thing. And I think it's similar for me, it's relationships. That's just the way I'm wired. um, I think for a lot of people it could be like a career, like, oh, like I'm putting all my energy and passion towards this my job, and I'm doing so well in my job, and it's satisfying to me, and it gives me meaning in life, and I can't wait for my next promotion or this project to finish or something like that. But if that's what you're putting your hope and your excitement and your energy and passion into, then I think that can become an idol for us. Not that we shouldn't be excited about our jobs, but there is a point where it can overcome your heart, and that is what is taking your attention and energy and time and love, because ultimately we're called to give our love to God and our hearts fully to God. So anyways, all that to say, I think there are lots of ways idols can manifest. I think it's sneaky, I think it's hard to fight, and I think we really need to be aware and on constant vigilance of it. And for me, after I got married, that was kind of a wake up call to how much that had been an idol in my life, and how much I need to really recenter and refocus my attention on God and give my hope and put my hope in God. So that's me, and that's my version of idolatry. I would just say everyone has idols they struggle with, and if you can't think of one, then I think there may be maybe that's something to pray and think and meditate on and analyze your life, which is what Aaron talked about yesterday. What and think about what do you turn to in time to struggle and things like that. So, anyways, I talked a long time. Someone go.
No, it's good. It's all good. I talked about mine yesterday, but I know that for me, it's kind of a pattern. Like for me, because I'm a fairly ambitious person, and so for me, like my ambitions, my goals, my dreams, and so yeah, I think that's probably where mine tend to err to. And I think what's interesting hearing each of you share is just like they're all so different, but none of these things are like inherently bad things, right? Like these are all really good marriage relationships, like all they're really good things, dreams, ambitions, like we're supposed to have, all those things are good things, God-given things. But yeah, just the idea that like I don't know, I feel like sometimes we think of idols, we just think of all these really bad things, and I think it can be really subtle in our lives that suddenly we're like, oh, I'm giving too much to this and not enough to God. And so yeah, I talked about mine a bit yesterday, but mine tend to be like my own goals and my own ambitions, and I tend to run so hard after those that sometimes I can lose sight of what's really important in my own life, and I see that in me. So
yeah, I think it's interesting to think about, how do we know what our idols are and how do we identify them? Like what you were saying, Ryan, what are we putting our hope into? If we would ask ourselves the question, if I only had this, then things would be okay, or life would be good, or all would be right. And I think we all have plenty of things in our life that we'd say, if we only had this, things would just be so much better. And that's a really good way to reveal what our idols are, because that helps us to see what we're putting our hope in. The other thing I was thinking about is when you worshiped an idol, like in this Old Testament times, you would like literally bow down to like this idol. Like, so you are postured facing this idol. And it occupies time and energy and attention and focus and resources. And I just reflect on the things in my life. What's occupying my time, attention, energy, focus, and resources? What am I postured towards? What am I working towards? Or what am I trying to accomplish? Or what's really, really important in my life? And these are all ways for me to see what I'm idolizing in the moment, in the day, this week, this year, this season, what I'm hoping in, what I'm looking towards, what I'm looking to. And so much of this sermon is about returning our priority and our primary focus to God Himself, depending on Him, meeting with Him, walking with Him, obeying Him, and all that He's commanded, and making sure that that's of primary importance in our life. And so, when I've recognized idols in my life in various seasons, I've definitely had to work daily to really say, okay, God, this is too much of a priority in my life. And I want to turn from this and I want to focus on you. Help me to do that. And I think it starts with prayer. And I think it's time in the word. And I think it takes practice. You know, there's been times where I've said, hey, I'm focused too much on what other people think about me. And I'm focused too much on if they think I'm doing great or not. So I'm going to adopt some disciplines to help me with that. I'm going to focus more on encouraging other people rather than thinking about what others might think of me. Or I'm going to focus on being generous with my time and attention and not always asking questions or things that focus on me. And so I try to come up with some creative disciplines to practice almost to help me to work out of that idle situation. And the last thing for me that I think that's helpful is understanding the root of the idol. Why is it that I keep headed in this direction? And why do I think that's going to fix things and make things right? And oftentimes, in any idol that I've had, there's something deeper. There's a deeper wound or a deeper thing I've experienced growing up that I've just kind of learned a certain habit or a certain attitude. And I think we need to address those, not just the idol itself. And so for me, I would say, like, on one hand, I really don't care what people think. And on the other hand, I really do care what people think. And I kind of have like both extremes that exist in my life. Um, but I have to ask the question, why is it that I think so much on that sort of plane, if you will? And then I look back at growing up and I look back on thinking of what other people said about me and how that affected me in positive and negative ways and why that means so much. And if I'm being honest, there's some need for healing there from stuff just growing up that was difficult for me. And I think I need to bring that stuff before the Lord to say, heal me from these past experiences in order for me to actually deal with the idol in my life. It's like not just addressing the symptom, but really addressing the root of what's going on. And I believe that God wants to heal the whole person, not just help us to get rid of our temporary idols, that He's interested in wholeness and making us right again. And that's part of our process of sanctification. And so those are some things that have helped me in my journey with idolatry.
Yeah, I really like how you talked about how wounds and things you've gone through in the past can often be like the root of the idol. Um, for me, I think, I think I've sought out in relationships the love, affirmation, and another word and I lost it. Love, maybe love, attention, and affirmation that maybe at times that I didn't have as a child, and now I seek them out in places in an unhealthy way. And I think confession time. I think the current thing that I'm struggling with an idol in this kind of the same way that like looking towards marriage is the light at the end of the tunnel, even though it wasn't the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a good thing, but it's not like this light. Like I've made it, yeah. Like now everything's good and I have no problems. But I think for me, like my current one that I'm struggling with, I think I've grown in that I recognize especially having been through the whole marriage, like light at the end of the tunnel experience where, oh, I can't wait. This is going to make my life so much better. And, and then experiencing that, oh no, my life still isn't perfect and I still have these issues. So currently for me, I think it's like having a kid. Like I'm really excited. I can't wait to have a kid, although me and my wife, we want to wait at least a couple more years. And also a pandemic's not a good time to have a kid. But that being said, like that's kind of in some ways for me now, that's like my light at the end of the tunnel. Like, oh, I can't wait. Like that's gonna be so awesome. I can't wait to be a dad and a kid and da 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 da. It's like, oh, now am I seeking love and affirmation and attention from my child because, and like, is that where I'm seeking it now? So recognizing those wounds and yeah, and also I've also very much processed that I feel like I recognize now that having a kid won't solve my problems because I've seen that marriage doesn't solve my problems. So I think I've grown in that way in dealing with my own personal idols from an emotional perspective. But it's still there in some ways. It's maybe weaker than it once was, but it's still there. It's still something in my heart and as in my identity that maybe I struggle with, and I should be putting more of my hope and identity into God. So I think it's a constant wrestle. And just because we're pastors slash seminarians, we've all either gone to or are going to seminary. We're not perfect, and we still struggle with these things emotionally and spiritually, and things we wrestle through. I think that having gone through these things, we have an increased awareness of it. And I think that's the first step, is increasing your awareness of what is the idol in your life. Because you can't, work on an idolatry problem if you're not identifying what the problems are and not spiritually and emotionally mature enough to find those things in your life. But anyways, also, in reference to I think everyone can go to counseling. And the reason I bring that up is because there's a negative stigma around like counseling and therapy sometimes. And I think everyone would benefit from counseling. Some people need it more than others, but everyone would benefit from it. So if any young people are listening, you're going to college and there's free counseling offered, take advantage of that. You don't want to pay $180 a session or something like that, which is what some counselors charge. So anyways, I'm just saying, because yeah, that can be a big part to help you grow and learn about yourself. So anyways, yeah.
Agreed. Counseling. I have benefited so much spiritually and emotionally from receiving counseling. I definitely highly recommend it. And if you need recommendations, I think the church has a referral list of places that we recommend. Is that true, Clement?
Yeah,
Okay.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, definitely recommend that if that's something you feel like you could use in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing, Ryan. I appreciate you kind of opening up about that. And I think that's all of us. We've all got some things, and it's really helpful to understand our motivations and to understand why we're doing things and why we want things. And it just helps us to be more honest and aware and just make better choices. And I think that's such a really important thing to discipleship that we often miss. We stay on the surface of trying to deal with things that look like sin, and we rarely really get to the root and work to see God heal and redeem those things.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard for a lot of people to get to the root because it's often really buried. Like if you'd asked me 17, like what are my issues that I'm struggling with versus what I learned in counseling 2 years later going to college, like it wasn't even on my radar, man.
Yeah.
They're just ways people have to learn about themselves and grow. And yeah, it's tough. It's hard. It's hard work.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of why you might want a kid too is because we have amazing kids, Aaron and I.
Separately.
Yeah.
Separately.
You're right.
My kids with my wife.
Yeah.
But you're around
on the kids in our small group. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. You're around
everywhere
in our church, and you're just wanting some of these amazing.
I think that has the I highlighted that desire. Yes, I agree actually. So.
Marion Thomas joined us and said, "Thank you, Aaron, for a beautiful message yesterday."
Oh, thank you, Marion.
Well, that about wraps us up for today. Any final last comments or quick thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Overflow. And we're so glad that you were able to be here with us. And we hope that it was a blessing and that it was formative. And we are just excited for you and hope and pray that you continue to grow in your faith with the Lord, and that this topic and series has been helpful and formative for you. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week, Monday at 12.